Black Op Radio presents 50 Reasons for 50 Years. Why the Warren Commission may be the greatest fraud perpetrated on the American public. Now your host, Len Osanek.
In this episode, we again expose the fraud of the Warren Commission. Defenders would like you to believe that no stone had been left unturned in their exhaustive investigation. Yet, as we shall see, the commissioners themselves were seldom there. The staff only took testimony, rarely followed leads, and as attorney J. Lee Rankin said, "We're here to close doors, not open them." The lengths they went to follow minutiae, such as Jack Ruby's childhood friends, while the obvious security failings in Dealey Plaza and serious flaws of the autopsy had been glossed over. Author Walt Brown exposes the Warren Commission as a fraud of an investigation.
This is Walt Brown, author of the recent JFK chronology. The Warren Commission was not only extremely selective in its choice of witnesses, but it was criminally selective in how it gathered testimony and interpreted it. Initially, the Warren Commission witnesses were interviewed by the FBI, and from FBI documents, the Commission chose the safest witnesses to deal with. A number of persons who were confronted with their FBI interviews stated clearly that what was shown to them was not what they said. In that moment of national crisis, there was not the sudden realization that the FBI would make up a good story, but ultimately that's exactly what they did. Some witnesses could not be avoided, so they were marginalized. As was common practice by the Commission, but nowhere else in law enforcement, witnesses were heard, quote, in groups, with several witnesses in the hearing room at the same time to minimize the chance of anything less than unanimity. Dr. Humes testified for the three autopsy doctors, and the other two, Boswell and Fink alongside him, simply were asked to agree with Humes. Fink and Boswell, two critical witnesses, were only asked 90 questions between them. Elnora Pitts, Jack Ruby's cleaning lady, was asked 190 questions. And make no mistake, the autopsy doctors were clearly prepped for their testimony. In later years, they would admit to meeting with future Senator Arlen Specter between 8 and 12 times prior to their testimony, but when asked what they told Specter, they insisted they didn't tell him much of anything. He told them. Countless witnesses were caught in flagrant perjury, but their testimony was critical, so it stayed in the record. Howard Brennan, the Commission's star witness, was facing east, toward the jail for the motorcade. But when photographed by the Commission, he was facing north, right into the front door of the book depository. He was caught in this lie by David Bellin, but it stood. Brennan claimed he could have identified Oswald in a lineup, but was afraid to. That is by no means the same as identifying him in a lineup, and between November 22nd and the time of his testimony, Brennan's eyes had been badly damaged by a burst of steam, so any identifying statements had suddenly become less than worthless. A classic bit of data was added as an afterthought in the testimony of movie maker Abraham Zapruder. He was essentially called to testify because he could not be avoided, but his perceptions were not asked. So at the end of the testimony, he told Wesley Lieber, there were indications that there were two, and that thought was just allowed to hang in the air. Wesley Lieber told him, your films were very helpful to the Commission. Jack Ruby's accountant was asked if he knew how Ruby got into the Dallas police basement to shoot Oswald, a question to which the Dallas cops themselves had no real answers. One wonders if they asked the Dallas cops if they knew how to depreciate capital gains. There were 15 Secret Service agents in the fatal motorcade. Although they were the most highly trained witnesses in terms of perceptions of the event, only 6 of them gave testimony, while 9 were ignored. 2 of those that were ignored, Sam Kinney and Emery Roberts, were less than 12 feet from the president when he was shot, but they were not called to testify. At the end of the day, the Warren Commission becomes a tragic fraud when considering it an investigation. 488 witnesses were called, but it was clearly a case of quantity versus quality, as any number of serious witnesses were not called. Of the 488, only 93 of them testified before a Warren commissioner, and the other 395 gave depositions before staff attorneys. Of note, the busiest Warren Commission stenographer in the Texas depositions was Odell Oliver, who was normally the court reporter for Judge Sarah T. Hughes, the jurist who swore in LBJ aboard Air Force One. The Warren Commission as an entity asked 109,930 questions, with the most questions put to Ruth Payne, 5,236, and Curtis L. Crayford, Ruby's porter, 3,972. The 9 most questioned individuals were all character witnesses and only had knowledge of the assassination based on what they had read or seen in the media. Of the 109,930 questions asked by the Commission, only 6,964 of them, or 6.3% of the total, were actually asked by commissioners, and many of those questions were introductory in nature. No witness testified in the presence of all 7 commissioners. A couple of marquee names, Marina Oswald and John Connolly, drew 6, but the reality of justice at all times demanded 7. Did the absentees read the testimony they missed? Of course they didn't. In conclusion, it can be said that it was a fraud from top to bottom, and although statistics are not universally the most reliable measuring tool, the statistics bear out the travesty that was substituted for justice in the so-called investigation into the broad daylight murder of the President of the United States.
Stay tuned for the next installment as we expose week after week 50 lies the Warren Commission would like you to believe.